The boarding pass was valid. The seat was paid for. But for 17-year-old Kennedy Washington, standing at gate B42 of JFK's Terminal 4, none of that mattered to the woman guarding the entrance to first class. In her hand, the ticket for seat 2A was a promise. But in the gate agent's eyes, it was a mistake, a fraud, an impossibility. Kennedy, a quiet artist with charcoal-stained fingers and her late father's observant eyes, was about to step into a storm she didn't create. This isn't just a story about a denied seat on an airplane. It's about the invisible turbulence of prejudice and the moment a daughter discovers the true, unshakable power of her mother. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport was a familiar cocktail of controlled chaos. It smelled of Cinnabon floor polish and the faint electric tang of jet fuel. For Kennedy Washington, it was the smell of transition, the scent of leaving one part of her life to visit another. Tucked into the crowded seating area near gate B42, she had her sketchbook open, the thick, creamy paper a sanctuary from the cacophony around her. Her charcoal pencil moved with practiced ease, capturing the stooped shoulders of a man wrestling with his luggage, the anxious energy of a family with toddlers, the practiced boredom of the business travelers. She was an observer, a trait inherited from her father David. He had been a jazz musician, a man who found rhythm in the mundane and melody in the silence. He'd taught her to see the stories people carried in their posture and the histories etched around their eyes. He'd been gone for 3 years, but his lessons lived in the graphite on her fingertips and the way she tilted her head when she was truly listening. Her mother Annalise was different. Captain Annalise Washington was a woman of straight lines, checklists, and precision. She navigated the complexities of a Boeing 777 with the same unflappable calm she used to navigate life. She was a force of nature, one of a handful of black female captains for a major carrier like Global Wings Airlines. Kennedy admired her beyond words, but their orbits, once tightly intertwined, had grown more distant since her father's passing. Annalise's world was the sky, a realm of physics and procedure. Kennedy's was the earth, a world of color, emotion, and messy, beautiful imperfections. Today, their worlds were supposed to connect. Annalise was piloting Flight 1107 from New York to Atlanta. Kennedy was her passenger, heading to see a grandmother whose love was as sharp-edged and conditional as her fine china. Her grandmother, Esther, had never fully approved of Annalise's career, too dangerous, not a woman's place, and had only ever offered grudging acceptance of her father. The visit was a duty, an obligation prompted by Esther's declining health, and Kennedy was steeling herself for a week of polite smiles and veiled criticisms. A metallic, pre-recorded voice announced the pre-boarding for Flight 117. Kennedy carefully placed a protective sheet over her drawing, tucked the sketchbook into her worn leather satchel, and stood up, stretching her long legs. She wore comfortable jeans, a vintage concert t-shirt from one of her dad's old gigs, and a pair of well-loved Doc Martens. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that fell just past her shoulders. She looked like an artist, a student, a teenager. She looked like herself. She walked towards the priority lane, her ticket, a crisp, first-class boarding pass for seat 2A, held loosely in her hand. Her mother always insisted, "If I'm flying the plane, you're getting the best seat. It's the only way I can keep an eye on you from 35,000 feet," she'd joke. At the podium stood a gate agent, a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of sprayed blonde hair and a name tag that read Brenda. Her smile was a thin, taut line, a fixture that didn't quite reach her eyes. Brenda was the undisputed queen of Gate B42, a domain she ruled with an iron clicker and a gaze that could size up a passenger's entire life story in a 3-second scan. As Kennedy approached, Brenda's eyes flicked from the teenager's face to her t-shirt, to her boots, and finally to the ticket. The thin smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something else, confusion, quickly hardening into suspicion. Pre-boarding is for our first-class guests, military personnel, and those needing extra assistance, Brenda said, her voice dripping, with a saccharine condescension that set Kennedy's teeth on edge. I know, Kennedy said, holding out her boarding pass. Seat 2A. Brenda took the ticket, holding it between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were a curious and possibly contaminated artifact. She scanned it. The machine beeped green, an affirmative electronic chirp that should have ended the interaction. But Brenda didn't move. She didn't hand the pass back. She stared at her screen, then back at Kennedy. There might be a mistake, Brenda said slowly, her eyes narrowing. Sometimes the system glitches. Let me just see your identification, sweetheart. The word sweetheart landed like a small stone. Kennedy felt a familiar prickle of annoyance. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it over. Kennedy Washington. Brenda stared at the name, then at the boarding pass, then back at the young woman in front of her. The gears were turning in her head, grinding out a conclusion that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with assumption. It says here the ticket was purchased with a Global Wings employee discount. Brenda stated, her voice lowering slightly, acquiring a conspiratorial tone, as if she were letting Kennedy in on a secret she'd just uncovered. A pilot's family pass, to be specific. Yes. My mother is the pilot, Kennedy said, her voice even. She refused to let the woman's suspicion get to her. This happened sometimes in different ways. The sales clerk who followed her too closely in a high-end store. The security guard who asked for her ID when her white friends walked by unchallenged. It was a low-level hum of prejudice she'd learned to live with. Brenda let out a small, disbelieving puff of air that wasn't quite a laugh. The pilot of this flight. Yes, Captain Annalise Washington. Brenda's expression hardened completely. The flimsy veneer of customer service cracked, revealing a bedrock of pure disbelief. She looked Kennedy up and down again, her gaze lingering on the faded t-shirt. To Brenda, a woman who revered the crisp uniforms and polished shoes of the flight crews she checked in every day, this girl did not compute. This girl with her artsy clothes and her braids did not fit the image of a captain's daughter, especially not the daughter of a first-class flying 707 commanding pilot. Listen, Brenda said, leaning forward and lowering her voice further. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a federal boarding area. Using a stolen or fraudulent employee pass is a serious offense. Kennedy's jaw tightened. The low-level hum had just become a siren. It's not fraudulent. It's my mother's pass. She's in the cockpit right now, probably doing her pre-flight checks. I'm sure she is, Brenda said, her voice now cold and hard. She pushed the boarding pass and ID back across the counter towards Kennedy. You're going to have to step aside. You are not boarding this aircraft in first class. The finality in her tone was absolute. Behind Kennedy, the line was growing. Faces were turning their expressions, ranging from impatience to mild curiosity. Kennedy felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a spectacle. You can't do that, Kennedy said, her voice trembling slightly with a surge of anger. The ticket is valid. You scanned it. My ID matches. I can and I am. Brenda retorted, her authority swelling with every passing second. She drew herself up straighter, a self-appointed guardian of order. We have a standard to maintain. People pay thousands of dollars for these seats. We can't just let anyone wander in. The implication was clear, hanging in the recycled airport air between them. Anyone like you. Kennedy stood her ground, her satchel clutched tight in her hand. The sketchbook inside felt like a dead weight. The world of observation was over. She had just been pushed onto the stage. The space around the podium at Gate B42 seemed to shrink the air, growing thick with unspoken judgment. Kennedy could feel the eyes of the other passengers, their curiosity curdling into impatience. A man in a tailored suit behind her sighed audibly, checking his gold watch with theatrical annoyance. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice clipped and entitled. "Some of us have connections to make." Brenda offered him a tight, apologetic smile before turning her attention back to Kennedy, her expression hardening once more. "The problem is being handled," she said, her voice carrying a clear message. "This girl is the problem." Kennedy took a deep breath, trying to channel her mother's legendary calm. Panic wouldn't help. Arguing seemed futile against the wall of Brenda's certainty. There had to be a logical solution. "Could you please just call the cockpit?" Kennedy asked, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "You can ask for Captain Washington. She will verify who I am. It will take 30 seconds. It was a simple, irrefutable request, a direct line to the truth. But for Brenda, it was an affront. It questioned her authority, her judgment, her gut feeling, which she trusted more than any computer system or apparently any pilot. "I am not going to disturb the flight crew during their final preparations for a bogus claim." Brenda snapped, her professional demeanor completely gone, replaced by raw, defensive anger. "The flight deck is a sterile environment. You think I'm going to bother the captain because a teenager in a t-shirt says, 'My mummy is the pilot'? Please." The man in the suit chuckled. "Kid's got guts. I'll give her that." A woman behind him whispered something to her companion, and they both glanced at Kennedy with pitying disdain. Humiliation burned hotter than anger. Kennedy felt her cheeks flush. She was being belittled, dismissed as a child throwing a tantrum. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to disappear into the anonymity of the terminal, but she couldn't. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about her mother's name. It was about her own dignity. "It's not a bogus claim," Kennedy insisted, her voice rising slightly. "Look up her employee file. You'll see she has a dependent daughter named Kennedy Washington. It's all right there. You just have to look." "I've looked enough," Brenda said, waving a dismissive hand. "Now I've told you to step aside. If you don't move, I will have to call airport security." The threat hung in the air. For a fleeting moment, Kennedy imagined it, the uniformed officers, the questioning, the walk of shame away from the gate. The image was mortifying. She fumbled in her satchel for her phone, her hands shaking slightly. Her one lifeline was her mother. She scrolled to Mom and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked to voicemail. "You've reached Annalise. I can't take your call right now, likely because I'm above 10,000 feet. Leave a message." Of course. Pre-flight protocol. Phones off. No distractions. The one time she desperately needed her mother's voice, it was replaced by a sterile, pre-recorded message. A wave of helplessness washed over her. "See," Brenda said, with a triumphant smirk, having watched the failed call. No answer. "I'm done with this." She picked up the phone at her podium. "I need security at Gate B42. We have a passenger causing a disturbance." A disturbance. Kennedy looked around. She was standing still, speaking clearly. The only disturbance was the one Brenda was creating. Suddenly, A new voice cut through the tension. What exactly is the disturbance? It came from a woman a few places back in the line. She was in her 40s, with a kind face and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore the practical, comfortable clothes of a seasoned traveler. Brenda's head whipped around. "This is an official airline matter, ma'am. I'm just curious," the woman continued, stepping forward slightly. "I heard the young lady ask you to verify her identity with the flight crew, and I heard you refuse. I also saw the scanner approve her boarding pass. So what's the actual issue?" The man in the suit muttered, "Oh, here we go. Another do-gooder." Brenda's face, already flushed, turned a shade redder. "The issue is a fraudulent use of an employee pass. It's a security concern. But you haven't verified that," the woman pointed out calmly. "You've just decided it. It seems to me you're making a rather large assumption about this young lady based on, well, I'm not sure what." Her meaning was clear. Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. "Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking a question," the woman replied, undeterred. As this exchange unfolded, the man in the suit, whose name tag on his briefcase read Gregory Finch, had discreetly taken out his phone. He wasn't defending Kennedy or questioning Brenda. He was filming. He held the phone low, angling it to capture Kennedy's frustrated face and Brenda's indignant one. He was a collector of drama, a vulture circling a potential social media moment. Kennedy saw him out of the corner of her eye. The small red recording light was on. Another layer of violation. She was now not just a spectacle, but content. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your place in line," Brenda said to the woman who had spoken up, her voice trembling with rage. She then pointed a finger at Kennedy. "And you. You've got 10 seconds to leave this gate area before those officers arrive." Kennedy felt trapped. Every option led to defeat. Arguing was useless. Her mother was unreachable. A stranger's defense had only made things worse. And now 2 Port Authority officers were walking briskly down the concourse toward them, their uniforms a stark symbol of impending authority. Brenda's expression was one of grim satisfaction. She had won. She had identified a threat to her orderly world and was having it professionally removed. The officers, a man and a woman, arrived at the gate, their faces impassive. "What's the situation, Brenda?" the male officer asked, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time he'd been called to her gate. This individual, Brenda, began gesturing at Kennedy as if she were a piece of unclaimed luggage, is attempting to board with a fraudulent first-class ticket. She's impersonating a pilot's family member and causing a scene when confronted. Kennedy opened her mouth to speak, to protest, to say anything, but the officer held up a hand. "Ma'am," he said to Kennedy, his voice polite but firm, "I'm going to need you to come with us. We can sort this out away from the gate." It was over. Defeated, Kennedy clutched her satchel, the sketchbook, inside a painful reminder of her quiet, observant life that had been shattered in the last 10 minutes. She took a step back, ready to submit to the humiliation. The other passengers stared, some with sympathy, most with the detached curiosity of people watching a drama that wasn't theirs. Gregory Finch's phone was still pointed her way, capturing her moment of defeat. She was alone, powerless, and publicly shamed. And as the officers prepared to flank her, the jet bridge door hissed open. The hiss of the jet bridge door opening was a sound that normally went unnoticed in the symphony of airport noise, but in the charged silence that had fallen over gate B42, it was as loud as a thunderclap. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright interior of the jet bridge, was a figure in a crisp, dark blue uniform. Gold stripes gleamed on the epaulets, and a pilot's hat was tucked neatly under one arm. The figure stepped forward into the fluorescent light of the terminal, and the crowd got its first clear look. It was a woman, a black woman, tall and poised, with an aura of command that seemed to alter the very air pressure in the room. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the scene. The two security officers, the self-satisfied sneer on Brenda's face, and the stricken, humiliated expression on her daughter's. Captain Annalise Washington had arrived. What in God's name is going on here? Annalise's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmuring with the precision of a surgical laser. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed, a voice that could calmly declare an emergency or address hundreds of passengers with equal authority. Brenda, who had been basking in the glow of her victory, froze. Her jaw went slack. Her mind, which had so confidently constructed a narrative of a delinquent teenager, struggled to process the reality in front of her. She looked from the uniformed captain to the girl in the concert t-shirt and back again. The resemblance was suddenly shockingly obvious, the same determined set of the jaw, the same intelligent eyes. The male security officer, recognizing the stripes on her shoulder, straightened up. "Captain, we had a report of a disturbance." "A disturbance?" Annalise repeated, her gaze locking onto Brenda. "My flight is scheduled to depart in 25 minutes, and my ground staff is busy creating a disturbance at the gate." She took another step forward, her polished shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. "And that disturbance appears to involve my daughter. So I'll ask again. What is going on?" She said the words, "my daughter," with a quiet, steely emphasis that left no room for doubt. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The man in the suit, Gregory Finch, slowly lowered his phone, his jaw hanging slightly agape. The kind woman who had defended Kennedy allowed herself a small, vindicated smile. Brenda's face, which had been red with anger, was now chalky white with dawning horror. She stammered, She had a first-class ticket, under a pilot's family pass." "She did." Annalise confirmed, her voice dangerously calm. "My pilot's family pass, for seat 2A, a seat I booked for her myself, for my daughter Kennedy Washington." She looked pointedly at Kennedy's ID, which was still sitting on the counter. "Is there some part of that you failed to comprehend?" She didn't look." Brenda's voice trailed off as she realized the hole she was digging for herself. She had no logical explanation. Her entire case had been built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated bias, and that foundation was now crumbling into dust. She didn't look like what Brenda Annalise pressed, taking another deliberate step closer to the podium. The two security officers instinctively took a step back, recognizing a battle that was no longer theirs to fight. "Didn't look like she belonged. Didn't look like my daughter. Didn't look like the kind of person you think should be sitting in the front of my airplane." Each question was a hammer blow, dismantling Brenda's authority piece by piece. The gate agent opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sounds came out. The smug certainty had evaporated, replaced by raw, undiluted panic. Annalise then turned her attention to Kennedy. The fury in her eyes softened instantly, replaced by a fierce, protective love. "Are you okay, Ken?" Kennedy, who had been frozen in a state of shock and relief, could only nod, her throat tight with emotion. The sight of her mother, so powerful and in control, was like a physical shield wrapping around her. Annalise gave her a reassuring nod before turning back to the scene at large. Her gaze swept over the security officers. "Gentlemen, thank you for your service, but as you can see, there is no disturbance here. Only a profound failure in customer service," You can return to your duties." The officers, visibly relieved to be dismissed, nodded curtly and walked away. Annalise then looked directly at Brenda, who seemed to shrink behind the counter. "You have publicly harassed and humiliated a minor. You have attempted to deny a valid fare-paying passenger access to her flight. And you have done it all in front of a gate full of our customers. You have not only insulted my daughter, you have insulted my uniform and this airline." She reached over, picked up Kennedy's boarding pass and ID, and placed them firmly in Kennedy's hand. Then she addressed the stunned passengers in the priority line. "My apologies for the delay, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice, once again, the epitome of professional poise. "There appears to have been a staff training issue. We will be commencing boarding immediately." She put a protective arm around Kennedy's shoulders. "Let's go, baby." As she guided Kennedy toward the jet bridge, she paused and looked back one last time at the shell-shocked gate agent. "Brenda," she said, her voice low but carrying to everyone nearby, "you and I will be having a conversation with your supervisor and the head of JFK ground operations the moment I land this plane in Atlanta." With that final devastating promise, Captain Annalise Washington turned her back and escorted her daughter onto the aircraft, leaving behind a ruined gate agent, a silent crowd of witnesses, and the lingering, undeniable proof that sometimes the person you dismiss is the one person you can't afford to cross. Walking down the jet bridge was like entering a different world. The chaotic energy of the terminal gave way to the quiet, climate-controlled hum of the aircraft. For Kennedy, it was a tunnel of surreal transition. The lingering shame from the gate warred with a swelling pride in her mother. She felt her mother's hand, firm and reassuring, on her shoulder, a silent apology for not being there sooner and a promise of protection now. As they stepped into the cabin, the flight attendant at the door, a man named Paul, with a warm, genuine smile, greeted them. "Welcome aboard, Captain." Kennedy. He knew her. Of course he knew her. The flight crew were like a tight-knit, transient family. His simple, friendly acknowledgement was a balm on the wound Brenda had inflicted. Paul, Annalise said, with a nod, "Could you make sure Kennedy is settled in, get her whatever she wants? I need to get back to the flight deck." Her tone was professional, but Kennedy could see the lingering fire in her eyes. "Of course, Captain." Annalise squeezed Kennedy's shoulder one last time. "We'll talk in Atlanta," she whispered, then turned and disappeared into the cockpit, the reinforced door clicking shut behind her. Kennedy stood for a moment in the galley, suddenly feeling the eyes of the other first-class passengers who had boarded before her. Gregory Finch, the man who had been filming, was already in seat 3C, his phone now put away, but his gaze was intense and curious. She could feel the weight of their new knowledge. She wasn't just a teenager in seat 2A. She was the pilot's daughter, the subject of the drama they had all just witnessed. She made her way to her seat, a spacious pod by the window, and sank into the soft leather. Paul arrived a moment later with a glass of orange juice. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and kind. "We heard some commotion on the radio." The captain was not pleased. "I'm fine," Kennedy lied, offering a weak smile. "Thank you." She wasn't fine. She was shaken, exhausted, and wired all at once. She pulled out her sketchbook, but for the first time in years, she felt no desire to draw. The faces of the passengers around her weren't stories she wanted to capture. They were jurors. She stared out the window, instead watching the ground crew scurry below, oblivious to the human drama that had just played out above them. The flight was smooth. Annalise's voice came over the PA system once after takeoff, her tone even and professional as she detailed their flight path and expected arrival time. There was no hint of the fury Kennedy had seen at the gate. She was Captain Washington again, a woman of checklists and precision, leaving Annalise, the mother, to be dealt with on the ground. Kennedy spent the 2-hour flight in a numb haze, the roar of the engines a backdrop to the replaying scene in her mind. The condescending sweetheart, the call for security, the look of utter devastation on Brenda's face. It should have felt like a complete victory, but it didn't. It felt messy and raw and deeply, deeply wearying. When the plane landed smoothly at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a sense of dread began to replace Kennedy's numbness. The conversation with her mother loomed, as did the week with her grandmother. She waited for the other passengers to deplane, not wanting to face any more curious stares. When the cabin was empty, Paul gave her a wave. "Your mum will be out in a few minutes. She's just finishing up the shutdown checklist." Kennedy nodded and waited. Finally, the cockpit door opened, and Annalise emerged, her hat back on her flight bag in hand. The look on her face wasn't one of triumph, it was one of exhaustion and grim determination. "Come on," she said, her voice tired. "Let's go get our bags." They walked in silence through the sprawling Atlanta terminal. The comfortable rhythm they usually shared was gone, replaced by a tense quiet. When they reached the baggage claim, Annalise's phone, which had been silent for the entire flight, began to buzz incessantly. She pulled it out, her brow furrowing as she looked at the screen. There were dozens of missed calls and texts. She tapped on one, her expression growing darker with every word she read. "What is it?" Kennedy asked. Annalise didn't answer immediately. She scrolled through another message, her thumb moving furiously across the screen. Finally, she looked up, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Unbelievable," she breathed. "Absolutely unbelievable. Mum, what's wrong?" Annalise finally met her daughter's eyes. The weariness was gone, replaced by a fresh, chilling wave of anger. "That was a message from Don Cartwright, my union representative. He got an urgent call from corporate." She took a deep breath, as if bracing for impact. Brenda Jenkins wasn't just reprimanded, she filed a formal grievance against me. Kennedy stared at her, uncomprehending. "Against you? For what? Unprofessional conduct, intimidation, and creating a hostile work environment." Annalise quoted, her voice dripping with bitter irony. "She claims I used my authority as a captain to threaten and verbally assault her in the performance of her duties." It was so audacious, so completely backward, that Kennedy almost laughed. "But that's insane. Everyone saw what she did. She's the one who harassed me." "It gets worse," Annalise said, her voice flat. "She has a witness, a passenger who has submitted a statement corroborating her version of events, a Mr. Gregory Finch." The name hit Kennedy like a physical blow. The man in the suit. The man with the phone. He hadn't been a passive observer. He had chosen a side. "He's lying," Kennedy said, her voice shaking. "He saw everything." "It doesn't matter what he saw," Annalise explained, the harsh reality of corporate politics evident in her tone. "It matters what he's saying. Global Wings has a situation. A gate agent, a union employee, is accusing a captain of misconduct with a first-class passenger as a witness. They don't see a mother defending her child. They see a potential lawsuit and a PR nightmare. The world tilted on its axis. The clear-cut victory at the gate had been a mirage. Brenda hadn't just been defeated. She had regrouped, rearmed, and launched a counteroffensive that was aimed directly at the heart of her mother's career. "My supervisor wants to meet with me first thing in the morning." Annalise continued, her gaze distant. They've already received a copy of Finch's statement. Don said they're talking about a formal investigation. They might even ground me pending the outcome. Ground her. The word was unthinkable. Annalise without her wings was like Kennedy without her sketchbook. It was a fundamental part of who she was. The incident at the gate was no longer just a personal insult. It was a direct threat to their entire lives. The storm Kennedy had stepped into at Gate B42 was far from over. In fact, it had just become a hurricane. The meeting was not at the airport, but at a sterile corporate office park in a suburb north of Atlanta, a place of manicured lawns and reflective glass buildings that betrayed no hint of the human dramas unfolding within. The Global Wings Airlines regional headquarters felt 1,000 miles away from the visceral reality of flight. It was a place of metrics liability and damage control. Annalise had insisted Kennedy come with her. "You are the center of this," she had said that morning, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You need to see how this works." They were shown into a conference room with a long, polished mahogany table that reflected their anxious faces. Awaiting them was Lawrence Hayes, the Vice President of Public Relations and Human Resources for the Southeast region. Hayes was in his late 40s with a perfectly coiffed haircut, a suit that cost more than Kennedy's first car would, and a smile that was all gleaming white teeth and no warmth. He was the human embodiment of a press release. "Annalise, thank you for coming in on such short notice," Hayes began, his voice smooth as silk. He nodded briefly at Kennedy. "And this must be your daughter, Kennedy. I'm so sorry you had to go through that unpleasantness at the gate." The word unpleasantness was so inadequate it was offensive. It was like calling a shark attack a disagreement with local marine life. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Lawrence Annalise said, her hands folded neatly on the table in front of her. "I am here because one of my gate agents committed an act of blatant discrimination against my daughter, and I'm now being investigated for it." "Explain that to me." Hayes's smile didn't falter. It was his armor. "The situation is, as you can imagine, extremely delicate. We have conflicting reports." He slid a folder across the table. "This is the formal grievance from Ms. Jenkins and the signed witness statement from Mr. Finch." Annalise opened the folder. Kennedy leaned over to read with her. Brenda's statement was a masterpiece of fiction. It painted Kennedy as a belligerent and argumentative individual who had become loud and abusive when her discrepancy with the ticket was pointed out. It claimed Kennedy had tried to force her way onto the jet bridge. Gregory Finch's statement was even more poisonous. It described Annalise's arrival as a shocking abuse of power. He wrote the captain stormed out of the jet bridge, used her uniform and rank to intimidate the gate agent, and publicly berated her in a tirade that left the employee shaken and in tears. In tears, Kennedy remembered Brenda's face being white with shock, not wet with tears. "This is garbage." Kennedy breathed, her hands clenching into fists. "He's lying. He filmed the whole thing. He knows this isn't what happened." Hayes steepled his fingers, his expression one of profound sympathy which Kennedy knew was utterly fake. "The video. Yes, we've inquired about that. Mr. Finch claims he only began filming when Captain Washington began her verbal altercation. He says he did it because he was concerned for the gate agent's safety. Unfortunately, that portion of the video strongly supports Ms. Jenkins's narrative. It was a perfectly constructed trap. Finch had captured the effect, not the cause. He had a video of the explosion, not the lit fuse. So you're taking the word of a disgruntled gate agent with a history of complaints, I checked her file, and a passenger who's clearly an opportunist over a captain with a spotless 17-year record. Annalise asked, her voice dangerously low. For the first time, a flicker of something real crossed Hayes's face. Annoyance. He wasn't used to being challenged so directly. Annalise, we value you. You are a pioneer and asset to this company, a symbol of our commitment to diversity. He said, the words sounding rehearsed. But Ms. Jenkins is a 15-year employee and a member of the ground crew union. The union is already screaming bloody murder. We cannot be seen to be summarily dismissing a union worker based on an accusation from management, especially when there's a passenger witness. So what are you proposing? Lawrence Annalise asked, though she already knew the answer. Hayes leaned forward, his voice dropping into a tone of chummy confidence. We need to de-escalate. Let this cool down. I am prepared to offer Ms. Jenkins a transfer to a non-customer-facing role and mandatory sensitivity training, a slap on the wrist between us. In return, the union will drop the grievance against you. He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. It was the classic corporate compromise: sweep it under the rug, make no admission of guilt, and move the problem somewhere it won't be seen. And what about the lie in my file, the formal grievance that says, I intimidated a colleague? Annalise asked. It would be retracted, quietly, Hayes said. But there's a condition. To show that we are taking the initial complaint seriously and acting impartially, we'd need you to accept a temporary paid administrative leave. A grounding, if you will, just for 2 weeks, a little vacation. By the time you come back, this will all have blown over. There it was, the price of peace. Annalise had to accept a punishment to make the whole problem disappear. She would have to accept being grounded, a black mark on her record, however temporary, in exchange for Brenda Jenkins getting a quiet transfer instead of being fired for her bigotry. Kennedy felt a surge of nausea. This was justice corporate style. It wasn't about right and wrong. It was about managing liability. No, Annalise said. The word was quiet but absolute. Hayes looked genuinely surprised. Annalise, I urge you to be practical. This is the cleanest way out for everyone. It's not clean, Annalise retorted, standing up. It's filthy. It's a deal that protects a racist employee and punishes the victim's mother for daring to defend her. It tells every bigot in this company that they can get away with it as long as they file the right paperwork afterward. You're asking me to validate their lies and sacrifice my own integrity to make your PR problem go away. She pushed the folder back across the table. I will not accept a 2-week grounding for defending my child. I will not sign off on a deal that buries the truth. You want to conduct a formal investigation? Go ahead. Interview every passenger on that flight. Subpoena the airport's CCTV footage from the gate area. Do your damn jobs. She turned to her daughter. Come on, Kennedy. As they walked out of the conference room, leaving Lawrence Hayes staring after them with a mixture of shock and fury, Kennedy felt a terrifying sense of pride. Her mother had refused to bow. She had chosen the harder, more dangerous path. But as the elevator doors closed, Kennedy saw her mother lean against the wall, the facade of strength momentarily cracking. Annalise closed her eyes, and for the first time, Kennedy saw not just the captain, but the immense weight she carried on her shoulders. She hadn't just declared war on Brenda Jenkins. She had declared war on the entire corporate machine. A machine that was designed to grind people like them into dust. The drive to her grandmother's house was thick with a new kind of silence. The corporate battle had been fought for now, and what remained was the raw, exposed nerve of their family. Esther Washington lived in a pristine single-story brick house in a quiet, oak-lined neighborhood of Atlanta. It was a house that smelled of lemon polish and potpourri, a place where coasters were mandatory and emotions were best kept under wraps. Esther was waiting for them on the porch, a small, bird-like woman with sharp eyes and a spine made of steel. She had been a school principal for 40 years, a woman who believed in order, discipline, and the quiet endurance of hardship. Her embrace for Annalise was stiff, her hug for Kennedy perfunctory. "You're late," she said. Her opening words not a greeting, but a critique. "I was starting to worry." "We had a delay," Mama Annalise said, her voice strained. Inside over glasses of iced tea that were too sweet. The story of the airport incident tumbled out. Kennedy watched her grandmother's face. As Annalise recounted the events, her expression shifting from concern to a tight-lipped disapproval that Kennedy knew all too well. When Annalise got to the part about her confrontation with Brenda, Esther set her glass down with a sharp click. "So you made a scene," Esther stated. "It wasn't a question." Annalise blinked. "A scene, Mama. I was defending my daughter. The woman called security on her, and causing a ruckus was the best way to handle that." And Esther countered, her voice sharp. "In my day, we learned to handle disrespect with quiet dignity. You don't give people like that the satisfaction of a reaction. You rise above. You don't lower yourself to their level and shout at them in the middle of an airport." Kennedy felt a cold fury rise in her chest. "Grandma, she was calling me a liar and a criminal." "Mum didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice, child," Esther said, turning her piercing gaze on Kennedy. "The world is not a fair place. We know this, but you do not win by being the loudest person in the room. You win by being the smartest. Your mother has a good, important job, a position of respect. Risking that over some ignorant woman's foolishness is not smart. It's reckless." The injustice of it was staggering. Her own grandmother was blaming her mother for standing up for her. It was the same logic Hayes had used, the logic of appeasement, of swallowing indignity for the sake of peace. "So I should have just let them escort my daughter out of the airport like a common thief," Annalise shot back, her voice trembling with a frustration that was clearly decades old. "Is that the dignity you're talking about, Mama? The dignity of letting them walk all over you?" "It's the dignity of not putting your entire career on the line," Esther retorted, her voice rising. "You have worked so hard, harder than anyone, to get where you are. Why would you hand them a weapon to use against you? Because she's my daughter." Annalise's voice finally cracked, the sound echoing in the unnervingly quiet house. "Because my husband, your son-in-law, who you never thought was good enough, taught me that some things are more important than a career. He would have never stood by and let that happen. He would have fought." The mention of her father hung in the air, a ghost at the table. David had always been the buffer between his wife and his mother-in-law. He was the one who could soothe Esther's rigid sensibilities and remind Annalise to breathe. Without him, they were just two strong-willed women, flint and steel. Kennedy couldn't stay silent any longer. "Dad would have been proud of her," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He would have been horrified that you aren't." Esther recoiled as if struck. Later that evening, the tension in the house was unbearable. Annalise had retreated into a shell of silence, making phone calls to her union rep. Esther was tidying things that were already tidy, a sure sign of her agitation. Kennedy escaped to the guest room, pulling out her sketchbook. She couldn't draw. Her hands felt clumsy, her mind a chaotic blur. She felt a profound sense of guilt. Was this her fault? If she had dressed differently, acted differently, would any of this have happened? There was a soft knock on her door. It was Annalise. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed. Her shoulders slumped. "Don't you ever, for 1 second, think this is your fault," she said, as if reading Kennedy's mind. "You did nothing wrong. You existed. That was your only crime in that woman's eyes." Tears welled in Kennedy's eyes. "But now your job, everything." "My job is just a job," Annalise said, though they both knew it was more than that. You are my life. I think I haven't been showing that very well since your dad died. I buried myself in the sky in the work." It was easier than facing the quiet on the ground. She looked at the sketchbook in Kennedy's lap. "He would have been so proud of the artist you're becoming, and so proud of the young woman who stood her ground at that gate." Kennedy finally let the tears fall. "I feel like I'm caught between you and him sometimes. You're all about rules and straight lines, and he was music. I don't know how to be both." "You don't have to be," Annalise said, her voice thick with emotion. "You just have to be you. You are the perfect mix of us both. You have my spine and his soul." It was the most honest thing her mother had said to her in years. In that small, quiet room, amidst the wreckage of the day, they were finally seeing each other again. Just then, Kennedy's phone buzzed. It was a notification from a friend. "OMG, is this you?" The message contained a link. Kennedy's heart plummeted as she clicked on it. It was a video posted on Twitter, and it was going viral. The title was entitled "Teenager and Her Aggressive Pilot Mumberate Airline Employee." It was Gregory Finch's video. It started at the exact moment Annalise was saying, "Didn't look like the kind of person you think should be sitting in the front of my airplane." It captured Annalise's righteous fury, but without the context of Brenda's provocation, it looked like a terrifying and unhinged attack. It showed Kennedy standing silently by, which in the context of the title made her look like a smug accomplice. The video ended with Annalise's final damning threat to Brenda about meeting with her supervisor. It was a perfectly edited piece of character assassination. The comments were a cesspool. "Power-tripping pilot should be fired. Spoiled brat probably gets whatever she wants. I feel so bad for that poor gate agent. She was just doing her job." Lawrence Hayes didn't need to conduct an investigation. Gregory Finch and Brenda Jenkins had just tried and convicted Annalise Washington in the court of public opinion. The viral video was a body blow. It felt like the final checkmate move in a game they were already losing. Annalise's phone began to ring with calls from reporters. The airline issued a terse public statement. Global Wings is aware of the incident and the video circulating on social media. "We are conducting a full and thorough investigation into the conduct of all employees involved. We are committed to providing a safe and respectful environment for all our customers and staff." It was a masterpiece of corporate neutrality, a statement that said everything and nothing. Esther saw the video and the comments, and for the first time, the rigid certainty in her posture seemed to falter. Seeing the anonymous vitriolic hatred aimed at her daughter and granddaughter seemed to hit her harder than the incident itself. The atmosphere in the house was one of grim despair. They were trapped, outmaneuvered. Annalise was on the phone with her union rep, discussing the bleak options. The pressure on the airline to fire her would be immense. It was in the midst of this despair that a second notification buzzed on Kennedy's phone. It was another link, this time from the woman at the gate who had tried to help. Her name was Dr. Aris Thorne, a sociology professor from NYU. Her message was simple. The truth needed to be seen. I hope this helps. Kennedy's finger trembled as she clicked the new link. It led to a YouTube video titled The Full Story at JFK Gate B42. What really happened before the pilot arrived. Dr. Thorne, it turned out, had also started recording, but she had started from the beginning. Her video began with Kennedy's calm, simple request, "Could you please just call the cockpit?" It captured Brenda's sneering refusal, her condescending use of sweetheart, and her escalating aggression. It showed Kennedy's poise, her repeated logical attempts to resolve the situation. It captured Brenda threatening to call security while Kennedy stood perfectly still, and the audible gasp from Dr. Thorne herself when Brenda made the call. The video was time-stamped. It showed a full 8 minutes of Brenda's unsubstantiated, biased escalation before Annalise even appeared. Dr. Thorne had provided a text description below the video, methodically breaking down the sequence of events and identifying the clear, implicit bias at play. She ended her post with a simple sentence: "This wasn't a power-tripping pilot. This was a mother arriving at the scene of her child's public humiliation." The effect was instantaneous and explosive. Dr. Thorne's video, posted as a reply to Gregory Finch's viral clip, spread like wildfire. It was truth as an antidote to a lie. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. The comments section flipped. Viewers were outraged on Kennedy's behalf. Hashtags started trending, #justice for Kennedy, stand with Captain Washington, fire Brenda. Gregory Finch's social media was inundated with accusations of selective editing and outright lying. He quickly deleted his original post and protected his account, but the damage was done. By morning, the story was on every national news outlet, this time with the correct context. Dr. Thorne, articulate and credible, was giving interviews. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami of public support. The first call came from Lawrence Hayes. His voice, once so smooth and confident, was now strained and desperate. He wasn't calling to dictate terms, he was calling to plead. "Annalise, a terrible, terrible misunderstanding," he stammered. "The new video, it changes everything. We at Global Wings are appalled by the treatment your daughter received. Are you Lawrence Annalise?" said her voice like ice. "Or are you just appalled at the new PR crisis the board has met? Ms. Jenkins' employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Mr. Finch has been banned from flying Global Wings for life. The grievance against you has been expunged, and we are issuing a formal public apology to you and Kennedy. We're also making a significant donation to a charity of your choice that promotes diversity in aviation." He paused. "And of course, there will be a more substantial and private settlement to compensate you for this ordeal." It was a total capitulation. They weren't just dropping the investigation, they were trying to buy their way back into her good graces. Annalise looked over at Kennedy, who was sitting at the kitchen table with her grandmother. She saw the relief in her daughter's eyes, but also the new hard-won strength. She looked at her mother, who was looking at her, with an expression of profound, tearful pride. Esther finally understood. It wasn't about making a scene, it was about holding a line. "I accept your apology," Annalise said, into the phone. "My lawyer will be in touch about the rest." She hung up without saying goodbye. The war was over. A few days later, they were back at the Atlanta airport for the return flight. Esther came with them to the gate. Her goodbye hug was different this time. It was warm, fierce, and long. "I am so proud of you," she whispered to Annalise. "Both of you. Your father would have been too." She looked at Kennedy and squeezed her hand. You keep drawing the world exactly as you see it, child. Don't ever let anyone tell you not to. On the flight home, Annalise wasn't in the cockpit. She had taken the time off. She was sitting next to Kennedy in seat 2B. They were just a mother and daughter flying home. As the plane climbed through the clouds, breaking into the brilliant, unending sunshine, Kennedy opened her sketchbook. She didn't draw the passengers or the clouds. She turned to a fresh page and began to sketch a portrait of her mother. Not Captain Washington in her crisp uniform, but Annalise. She captured the strength in her jaw, the wisdom in her eyes, and the faint, tired lines of a battle hard fought and won. But for the first time, she also drew the soft curve of her mouth, the hint of a smile, not of victory, but of peace. She had her mother's spine and her father's soul, and for the first time, she understood it wasn't a contradiction, it was a symphony. The story of Kennedy and Captain Annalise Washington isn't just about a gate at an airport. It's a powerful reminder of the quiet courage it takes to face down prejudice and the fierce love that turns a mother into a warrior. They were confronted not just by one person's bias, but by a corporate machine that was ready to sacrifice them for convenience. Yet they refused to back down. Their journey through this storm of accusation and public shame, only to emerge stronger, is a testament to their integrity and the unbreakable bond of family. It's a story of how one person's voice, armed with the truth, can change the entire narrative. If their story of courage and resilience moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with your friends and family, because these are the conversations we need to be having. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. Thank you for listening.